Welcome, fellow enthusiasts of the unexplained, to Sasquatch Watch Radio. If you're as fascinated by the elusive, legendary creature known as Bigfoot, you've found your new home here on Sasquatch Watch Radio. We're diving deep into everything Bigfoot. From thrilling eyewitness accounts and compelling scientific theories to the latest research, expeditions, and even a little bit of the folklore that surrounds this enigmatic being, we'll explore it all. Whether you're a seasoned squatcher or just curious about the giant hairy dude in the woods, you're in the right place. Get ready to have your perceptions challenged, your curiosity piqued, and maybe, just maybe, you'll start looking at the shadows in the forest a little differently. So settle in, turn up your speakers, and let's journey together into the heart of the Sasquatch mystery. This is Sasquatch Watch Radio, and the hunt for truth begins now. Here is your host, Gary Kendrick.
Hey everybody, today is August the 18th, 2025. You're listening to Sasquatch Watch Radio. Got a great show planned for you this evening. Got a very interesting guest, Miss Linda Eastburn. And Linda is an author. She wrote a book, Threshold to Encounters, that we're going to be discussing in the show. She's a researcher, a podcaster, and we'll bring Linda on without further ado.
Hello,
Linda. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's a nice, sunny, beautiful morning here in Missouri.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Is it raining?
No, it's sunny.
Yeah, be glad. Well, that's all we've had is rain here for about the past month.
Yeah. Where are you located?
Actually, I live in Southwest Virginia. Okay. I'm on the very tip of Virginia, and my town actually kind of borders Kentucky. So
yeah,
we're kind of in a...
Here. Yeah, through Missouri, we've had some flooding. I mean, it's kind of dried up now, but earlier in the spring we had a lot of flooding.
Yeah, it's been an unusual year, I have to say that. Well, Linda, I'm gonna hop right into it with my first question. Excuse me. What got you interested in Sasquatch?
Well, it's kind of a strange story, as you know. I'm an intuitive, so I listen to that gut feeling, a lot of the time. And I was talking to a friend, and she was telling me some things she kind of saw, and she said, "Oh, and by the way, I saw Bigfoot." Whenever I was, talking about this, and I thought, well, Bigfoot, it's like what you call Sasquatch. She referred to it as Bigfoot, and it's like, well, I have no idea why, because I had no knowledge of Bigfoot. It just was a foreign subject to me. But within a few days, there was something came across my Facebook feed about a Bigfoot conference in my neck of the woods. And it was the first one, to my knowledge, that had ever taken place here. So I looked at it, and I was doing another show at the time called Intuitive Journeys, filming that. And it was kind of dragging, wasn't a lot of views on the channel. It was on YouTube, but it wasn't really doing very well. And I realized we needed to kind of spice it up a little bit, get some new thoughts, new ideas in there. So I saw this Bigfoot conference, and I thought, well, maybe I could interview some of these people that are going to speak at the conference. And I was looking through the list, and I thought, well, there was Scott Nelson, the man who had analyzed the Sierra Sounds. Now, I didn't know what the Sierra Sounds were, had no idea who this guy was or anything about him. But for some reason, he caught my attention. There again, it was that gut feeling of kind of I think I could interview that guy if he's willing to let me interview him. I didn't know where he lived. I tried every way in the world to find him on the internet. He had absolutely no footprint on any social media, nothing. I could not find this guy. So I went to the conference and listened to his talk. And afterwards, he was inundated with people going around him talking. So I just asked his son if there was an email or something where I could get in touch with him, and he gave it to me. So later on, I got in touch with Scott Nelson, and he was very open for an interview. So I went the 3 hours from my house in Springfield, Missouri, up to Kansas City, where he lived. And we spent 6 hours with 3 cameras getting his whole story about analyzing the Sierra Sounds.
Oh, wow.
So I came home, made like Bigfoot the Language, put that out, and it soared up to now it's 265,000 views. And that's what drew me into the whole Bigfoot thing.
Wow. Very interesting. Very interesting. My next question is, have you ever had an encounter with Sasquatch?
I've not had an encounter. When we filmed Byways of Bigfoot, which was along the Niangua River and along some personal property near the Niangua River, I didn't know if we would find any evidence out there, but I knew of people who had seen things in that neck of the woods. So we filmed in several different locations out there. And in each location where we filmed, we found evidence, footprints, some really interesting broken trees really close to the footprints. We found a claw mark, like 10 feet up in the air on a tree that was kind of interesting. Don't know if that had to do with Bigfoot, but it might have. Along the river, back by some bluffs, we found another very interesting tree break with footprints along that area, where people had seen Bigfoot previously. And then on some personal property, we found a trackway. And that was really interesting. We looked at a lot of areas on that private land. We put out some gifting things, and we didn't get any response from the gifting for a while. But then after a time, we did. We put out a box with a really difficult latch on it. We would have to have some skill to get that latch open and get into the box that had peanut butter in it. And eventually, it took about 2 months or so. And this was, it was obvious that something had gotten into the box. Was able to open it. Was able to get out the peanut butter and eat it. I did a second show on that, kind of revisiting that place. There were also some interesting berry bushes that were laid down, they were laid down uphill, which if it were water that laid them down, it would be downhill. And there was a big patch of blackberry bushes, and they were all laid down uphill. So we know something was laying on them. Seemed like an awful lot for like deer do lay down, some places, but I don't know if they lay down on blackberry bushes, but we did find that along the way as well. So there was a lot of really interesting things that happened to us while filming that Byways of Bigfoot, but I didn't actually see a Bigfoot, and we didn't actually hear any sounds of Bigfoot.
Did you notice any unusual smells or anything like that?
Not while we were filming, no. And the man that lives on the private property, he had some really interesting encounters on there. He hasn't seen Bigfoot, but he has had the sounds. He'd had gifts on his front porch, some really unusual things gifted on his front porch. And I had just done an interview with him when I decided to make the Byways of Bigfoot and use the Niangua River as kind of our backdrop. Niangua River has a lot of history of Bigfoot along the river. And it's like 200 miles of river frontage that goes into Lake of the Ozarks. All along that river, there have been sightings of Bigfoot, some really interesting sightings of Bigfoot. And then at Lake of the Ozarks, even, there have been some sightings of Bigfoot. So I thought that would be a good place to start to do our research and, to just make a film about that. And we had a really good time doing it.
Interesting. That kind of plays into one of my own personal theories that Sasquatch cannot veer far away from a permanent water source simply based on their size and what water intake it would take. I'm assuming they would need, a massive quantity of water a day.
I agree. Yeah, I think waterways are important, and also there's usually good food source around waterways, whether it be fish or deer or whatever. I do think that there's a need for that. So I think waterways is a good way for them to just even move. And the 450 interviews I've done with people, lots of times they'll see Bigfoot in the water. It's just they'll see it in a creek or a river, something like that. So I think they're often around waterways.
Yes, ma'am. The next question I have for you, it's going to sound weird, okay? But okay. I ask all the guests this question, and it kind of allows me to get into the headspace of the guests that we have. The question is animal mineral, or vegetable? And I'll explain it as I go. Animal, do you believe that Bigfoot is a living animal? Mineral, do you believe that Bigfoot might be interdimensional or extraterrestrial? Or vegetable, do you believe that Bigfoot might be spiritual? Or do you think it may be a combination of any of those?
I'm open-minded about it. I don't have any of my own personal experiences to say, oh, I'm 100% sure it's this. From my interviews, those split almost 50-50, where people see Bigfoot and to them, it is just a flesh and blood creature and no questions asked. There's nothing more to it. But then the other 50% of my interviews, and I've done my fair share, about 450 interviews with people across the country and other countries as well. They have some kind of an odd experience, whether it be a Bigfoot turning into a light or an orb, or a Bigfoot just disappears in front of their face. And we don't know if that's our limited perception ability. We can't see necessarily every little detail of everything, or if it's really something that Bigfoot is doing. The other thing is, the mind speak phenomena that people have, where they think that, they have communication with Bigfoot. There's also been some talk about Bigfoot having connections with UFOs. And I've had a few people that have had UFO experiences, during the time that they're seeing Bigfoot or in an area where Bigfoot is encountered. The latest thing, which I think was really interesting, is in areas where Bigfoot is seen, there's radiation now being discovered, where there's some kind of an unusual physics, situation happening there. The same thing with UFOs. There's a lot of radiation in the area. And then, of course, we have the Trey Hudson with the meadow that had a very unusual cube seen there. There was radiation found within, I think, that area, Bigfoot, UFOs, you name it, everything happening in that location. So I don't know if there's some, physical change that happens that allows us to see Bigfoot. If it was an interdimensional thing that, that we're seeing, or if it's the person themselves that are able to see the unusualness of Bigfoot. Yeah, I don't know. I'm all over the place. I haven't concluded anything because I really don't have anything to base it on other than the 450 interviews that I've done. So I'm leaving it wide open as to what it might possibly be.
Yes, ma'am. That's always, in my opinion, and I've been told my opinion ain't worth much, but in my opinion, I take people's encounter at face value simply because that was what they experienced. I was not there. I don't know. But I take people's, accounts at face value. And with that being said, I also try to, as I interpret it myself, I try to use a lot of science. And, I've kind of grown up around the woods and been in the woods quite a bit. And, I hunt, I fish and things like that. I'm currently in my camper at the river. So, I try to, interpret into it, what they think may have been, it disappeared. It could have just been, that it moved away and laid down somewhere and they could no longer see it, or, something like that. But in my own personal opinion, I think it is an animal. And I think that, and I don't know, you might be able to interject on this a little bit. I don't know. But I think a lot of the things that people see, they get hyped up. And, they're looking for Bigfoot. So automatically everything that they hear, see, or smell is Bigfoot. And I don't think that's always necessarily the case. But it's interesting that, you do hear a lot of these strange things. I know you mentioned the orbs, and I've had experience on a Bigfoot expedition with orbs. And I've tried for probably 13, 14 years to explain it. And I have no explanation as to what they are. And I've went pretty deep into it.
Well, yeah, the orbs, I've done UFO research for years, and I'm pretty new into the Bigfoot research, but I've done UFO research for years. So orbs have always been associated to some degree with the UFO phenomena. Now, but orbs may actually just be some natural phenomena that's happening in the woods. We don't know. May have nothing to do with UFOs or Bigfoot. Orbs just seem to exist, and it seems like they exist more readily in nature. When people are out in the woods or, some clear night sky, but they do behave oddly sometimes, almost intelligent, like their movement, the way that they interact with people. They even respond to people. Sometimes I've heard people say, they tell them to just go away and they would just go away. So I don't know if they're intelligent enough to communicate with us, if it might be some kind of a consciousness of some sort that has light wrapped around it. If they're actually related to Bigfoot, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of an enigma. I don't think any of us really know. It's just kind of one of those questions that's out there. And like I said, I went pretty deep on it. The area that we experienced them had a large amount of quartz,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really swampy. So that was one of my things. I know quartz will hold, an electrical charge,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, well, maybe it was just that quartz was charging swamp gas. But then when I thought about that, if it had been swamp gas, it would have all been the same color, and we had multiple colors. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing when you get into it.
Yeah, it is, and I think probably there has been more research than I'm aware of on the orb phenomena, but I don't have much of an answer for that. It does seem to correlate a lot when people are in nature, though.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it might actually be just a natural occurrence, but it's really hard to tell. My next question for you, and this is going to seem kind of strange, is I know you do remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that most people can be trained to do remote viewing.
They
But
can.
have you ever seen a Sasquatch while remote viewing?
Yeah, we actually did a deliberate remote viewing process. This was back in the winter, so we haven't actually explored this, but I just asked the question, where would be the best possibility along that Niagara River to actually find a Bigfoot? Now, I didn't get the parameters of the exact coordinates to be able, longitude, latitude, to be able to go directly to that. But the Niagara River runs real close to where I live, so it's not hard for us to research that. But it's 200 miles, so I haven't been up there. But what I got was about halfway, about midway between where I live, where the Niagara starts, and where it ends, where it dumps into Lake of the Ozarks. There's an area there called Bennett Springs. And near Bennett Springs, there are a lot of dead-end roads because, frankly, the river's there, and it's a pretty good-sized river. If you don't have a bridge, you're not going to get over it.
Oh, yes.
So I saw an area kind of halfway between here and there, and it gets real hilly up there as well. It's a pretty rugged area, sparse of houses, some farm country. Mostly it's just wooded area. But I saw about halfway near the Bennett Springs area this really deep kind of ravine that a dead end road backed up to a gravel road, and at that end of that gravel road was a goat farm. Now, I haven't explored all of the dead end roads around that Bennett Springs area, and I really don't know how to find out there's a goat farm there unless I drive down the road and actually see a goat farm. But up in that ravine, wherever that goat farm is and wherever that dead end road is, up in that ravine, I saw a clan of Bigfoot that would be really easy to probably get in touch with. Now, I plan to do some more remote viewing on that, get a little bit closer in to where that road is and how to maybe get permission to go in there and look at that. I just haven't got a research group together yet to go in there and film that.
Yes, ma'am. And just, kind of out of my own curiosity, what entails remote viewing? How do you go about doing that?
Well, remote viewing is just where you receive a signal that is not coming from your five senses, but you have to decode it into something that makes sense in your five senses. There's a training process. I have a group that I work with every Tuesday that I train them constantly to be better remote viewers, including myself. Where the term came from was Ingo Swann, who was with the Stargate project out at Stanford Research Institute, and they developed a really elaborate process. Now, we use a 3-page process, but they did elaborate remote viewing that was up to 65 pages. When you have 65 pages of remote viewing process, you've got some detail that you can work with. I teach people a 3-page process just because within the limited time frame that we have and the limited amount of interest that people have in putting themselves into doing this, it's interesting. But what you do is you have a target, and that target just has 4-digit number. You have no idea what your target is. Because if you think you know what the target is, the problem is that you may get lost in trying to fill in the blanks yourself and its imagination now, rather than actually receiving and decoding this other message that comes in. So you have a list of words, and those words help you describe it. And you intuitively, there again, you kind of get a sense. After a while, you get a sense of which words you need to put down, which words you need to leave off. But then we go through, the reason we do more pages is with each page, we get more detail. We leave off the words that don't fit, and we don't add any more words, but we leave off the words that do not fit. And we keep building and perfecting a drawing and a summary of what that remote viewing target actually is. And after a while, I mean, lots of times people get this on their first try, but after a while, you become aware of that gut feeling I'm talking about. That gut feeling starts talking to you more directly, and you know exactly which words to put down. And even if you get a whole bunch of words that do not apply, it doesn't matter. By the time you get to that last page, you've eliminated the ones that do not count. That's the technical remote viewing that I teach, but there are many ways you can get on that signal. And sometimes it's, even just listening to your dreams and, stuff like that. I mean, sometimes there's all kinds of ways that messages can come in, but this was a way the military used it to be able to spy on foreign submarines or bases or even people or find things. And it proved to be a pretty good resource.
Now, I know the military did have, I don't remember if it was in the 60s or the 70s, but they did was it MK Ultra?
MK Ultra, yeah, that's a whole different thing. MK Ultra deals more with mind control and things like that. This is more just accessing information from that intuitive point of view. It's more of it's kind of a psychic, it's a very detailed, structured way for psychic information to come through, and you decode it. And the good thing about remote viewing, I mean, psychics don't have a good reputation sometimes because it's all just real iffy if any of it's real or not. The good thing about remote viewing is, and I like facts and figures and things that you can prove. The good thing about remote viewing, this process, you can pretty much tell if they're on target, if they're not on target, and you have to have X amount of correct things in your drawing and summary before we consider it a hit, that you've actually gotten it correct. So those are things, and then you can begin to know your statistical rate of accuracy. We did a future viewing stock market, I think for about a year with about 6 remote viewers, looking at various stocks, and we didn't know which stock we were looking at. So, we didn't have that prejudice. We weren't putting any money on the stocks. We were just seeing if we could see how well they were going to perform within a certain period of time. And what we were asking was, will this stock go up by 20% by such and such date or not? So it's a yes, no. It was a yes, no. So we did associative remote viewing with this, which you have 2 pictures and you draw the one that's the correct answer. You don't see the pictures. You don't know the stock that you're doing. Within our group, we had a 65% accuracy rate of being able to predict if those stocks would actually go up or not. I had about an 85% accuracy rate on those stocks. And we did that for a good year. We would meet once a week. We would do a stock in-house at our meeting. We'd send us a stock number home with them, and they would do it there. So we had a lot of figures to be able to assess our accuracy rate. So there's lots of ways you can prove it. Yes, no, it's right, it's wrong, it's black and white. For people who say this isn't accurate or isn't real, it is. I mean, it has some fallacies. Obviously, 45% wasn't correct on the 65% accuracy rate, but we got more accurate than not. And so if you know how accurate you are, you know how much you can trust that. Now, when the military put this together, one of the reasons they did 65 pages is they couldn't take chances. If they were looking for, some kind of a new, maybe a nuclear machine or something that a foreign country had, they had to be able to trust it. So they couldn't take that percentage of inaccurate information and trust that because it wasn't correct. So that was why they perfected this so well, to be able to get it right.
Do you think that possibly remote viewing may be a future tool that could be used in Sasquatch research?
I think it could be. At one point I was trying to talk with people about that if they wanted to learn remote viewing purely for the purpose of, finding or discovering more things about Sasquatch. I'd be happy to put that course together for people. Could do it virtually even, for people to be able to identify where they are, what they are even. I haven't done that personally, but I think it'd be a really interesting project.
It would be. That sounds fairly interesting. This is another question here. Has Sasquatch changed your view on interactions between humans and nature?
Well, you know what it made me think is about all of the tales, I guess, from the past where people said that, you know, that they could see fairies and, you know, and trolls and all of the creatures that were in nature. And, you know, and that they would be able to, you know, like communicate with these creatures and such. And as some people started talking about Bigfoot, you know, they'd see them beside a tree and then they just disappear into the tree. And then, of course, the Native American legends where they talk about them, you know, being the keepers of the forest and almost like they are just a natural part of the living existence of forest. And, you know, some of the behavior that they talked about, it made me just question that, I guess, if they are actually, you know, kind of like part of that. And then some people are able to see them as in that respect, and other people just see them as this flesh and blood creature. Obviously, they reproduce. We have juvenile Bigfoot. Obviously, they leave footprints and they leave handprints. So there has to be some physical element to these things. I mean, there has to be, because we wouldn't have that otherwise. But, you know, it kind of made me question that. It's like, well, you know, I'd never really gotten into that fairy world at all. Some people even were referring to them as fray, that, you know, that they are just part of that world. But, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, strictly by definition, Sasquatch is paranormal because it's not proven by science.
True.
So that's, you know, I think a lot of people fall into that, you know, oh, it's paranormal, it's blah, 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 whatever. But, you know, like I said, by definition, it is, because it's just not proven. And there's a lot of guesswork, I think, in it. You have to build your hypothesis, and then you have to prove it. And that, you know, like I said, I try to use a lot of science in what I do and things like that, which some of it pans out and some of it doesn't. Like I said, with the light experience, I have absolutely no explanation as to what it is. So, you know, I can't prove or disprove that it has anything to do with Sasquatch or not. So it's interesting. Now, I know when I initially got in contact with you and we scheduled our meeting here, one of the strange questions that I asked you was, what type of music do you like?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you don't get asked that question a lot.
No, not for Sasquatch interviews. No.
Well, what we've done is we've had, we do this for all the guests. We had AI create a song for you, and we're going to play it right now.
Great.
All right. So I'm going to take us out and we're going to play the song here.
Eastburn, she lives up on the ridge, studies them hairy giants, works until she's rigid, got a tape recorder and a keen ear for a whispered story, banish all fear, Linda Eastburn, she ain't afraid. Oh, Linda, chasing shadows in the pines, Linda, something that unwinds a tangled truth, the hidden thing, what will she find, Linda Eastburn, down the Bigfoot trail. She interviews the loggers and the shaken, shocked and stirred, the campers who swear every single word is gospel true about a beast so tall. Answers Linda seeks, she needs them all. She needs them all. She takes notes, compiles her facts, never looks back. Oh, Linda, chasing shadows in the pines, Linda, searching for something that unwinds the tangled truth,
All right, that was a pretty good one.
Oh, yes, it was. I was impressed.
You can you got a new theme song for your YouTube channel now, I believe.
I do, yeah.
My next question for you is, how do you feel that your research has changed since you've started into Sasquatch and have interviewed all of these people about Sasquatch?
Well, I can tell you, given my start where I knew nothing, my questions were very elementary, and I didn't know where to go with an interview. I just let them lead, of course, and I still let people lead pretty much in the interviews that I do. But now I know what they're talking about because I've learned the language, and I know what they mean when they see this or they have that experience. So I'm willing to ask more in-depth questions now, more intelligent questions, because I have a few interviews under my belt and a lot of different views and opinions. And much like you, it's like you get a feel for your guest as to whether they're going to be flesh and blood or they're going to be, into this kind of unusual phenomena. And I kind of just help them to bring out the best story they can. But I always have, my initial question is, what got you into this? Because, and it'll almost always be as a child, they saw a film or they read a book and they just got engrossed in it. But for some people, it was actually a sighting of some sort or a sound they heard while camping or some unusual phenomena like that drew them in. And I found that, it would go one of two ways. Either it would terrify them, they'd never go back in the woods again, or they would just be obsessively pulled in and just want to research Bigfoot. So I started to get to know the people that get invested in this, the researchers, why they're researching it. I also understood that some people had, PTSD because they had seen something that couldn't explain and it just didn't fit with their foundation of reality. And so they were just traumatized at times, or for a long time were traumatized. Also that people couldn't, maybe a little bit better now, just come right out and tell people about this because they were made fun of or ridiculed, or it was a horrific thing, especially 30 years ago. Today, because of shows like yours and mine and a lot of the other shows that are out there, people are a little bit more, I guess, accepting of the possibility of Bigfoot. Yeah. But my questions became more sophisticated and I just become more knowledgeable instantly knowing what they're talking about when they bring something up.
Now, I know, like with my encounter, I actually had a sighting of a Sasquatch, and it walked across the road in front of me. I actually had to stop my vehicle to keep from hitting it. So it was only about 3 feet in front of me. And it was a really interesting encounter. But there was 2 of us. I had picked a guy up. We were going to work. And we had completely polar opposite reactions. His was fear. He didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't want to talk about it. Nothing. And I had always had a belief that Bigfoot was real. Since I was young, I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film when I was young. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and, In Search Of was a big thing and things like that. And I was the one that wanted to research and study, and I wanted to know, as much as I could. And I'd been researching ever since I was little, reading books and things like that. But as far as, once I saw it, that was it. I was hooked. And you do have a lot of that. And it is a lot more accepted now. And I think a lot of it does have to do with programs, podcasts, and things like that. And, that's one thing, like, I may not necessarily agree with someone's interpretation of what Sasquatch is. That does not mean that, I'm going to ridicule them for it or whatever, because I'm not for sure what their experience was. I was not there. So I take everything at face value. If you said you saw this, I have to believe that, and, you saw that. And I think that's a big thing now. It is a lot more accepted because people have taken that instead of saying, hey, you didn't see that. That wasn't real and whatever. So, yeah, it's really been beneficial to a lot of people in the Bigfoot world, I believe.
That's true. And I think after a while, after 450 interviews, my argument is, well, 450 people can't just be off kilter about what they saw or experienced. So there has to be something to this. I mean, I no longer am willing to accept that they're just making it, all of them are making it up, or all of them had some delusional experience. I believe that they were very authentic in most of their stories that they're telling, including yours.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, if mainstream science accepted it more instead of just passing it off as just, misidentifications or things like that, the research would advance a whole lot further. We only have a handful of actual honest to God scientists that will even say, yeah, I believe it's real. And that's hard. This is a good one. I know you said 450 interviews, and that's a lot. And that's a lot of information. But what is your favorite encounter story that you've heard?
Well, I'm still going to have to go back to the Sierra Sounds. That was just such, and it was such a long time ago. Would have been more difficult to fake those recordings. Now, they still don't know for sure that was Sasquatch, but they believe it was. They believe that was, and of course, other people who have been in areas have heard something similar to that, that chatter that they recorded. But that still has to be the most profound story that I've heard. And I went to North Carolina and interviewed Ron Moorhead at a conference once, and Scott Nelson, the linguist, was also there. So I got a more detail even into that story. But that story, it holds, so much rich information about the possibility of what, Bigfoot really is. They have, they may be, pretty sophisticated, very bright, pretty sophisticated, may have this language. There was a lot of articulation in the interpretation that Scott Nelson did with the language to see that they had, a range of emotion. He believed that the recording had a male, a female, and a child. You could distinctly hear the difference in their voices. So that was something that to me took it, I guess, beyond just, a short little encounter of seeing the Bigfoot somewhere to something that had some really concrete evidence behind it, that this was really a creature with a language, with offspring, with emotion, with ability to communicate in a verbal sense. And then Ron Moorhead added to that, all of his experiences up at the Sierra camp, which were very, very interesting. And some really unusual things happened up there. But the recordings were just, and there were lots more recordings than most of us hear. There were lengthy recordings of the chatter, but it was probably some of the best evidence because it was such a long time ago and no one was expecting to hear a Bigfoot up there. No one was expecting this sound to come through on these recordings.
Yeah, it's a really interesting encounter. I know I've met Scott Nelson and Ron Moorhead both and spoken to both of them. I actually spoke to Scott at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Festival a few years ago in Townsend, Tennessee. And from listening to Sierra Sounds, I've listened to them for a long time. And I asked him, I said, does it sound to you like it's a specific type of language? And I said, I'll just tell you my own kind of what I hear. It sounds almost like an Asian type language because I was in the military and I was stationed in Japan for about a year. And just certain, they call it the samurai chatter. Mm-hmm. And certain parts of it do sound like an Asian style language, but it's incredibly fast. And another thing that I mentioned too was, do you think that they're trying to mimic some of the words that they've heard Ron and the other guys at the elk camp say? Because it almost sounds like at certain times they're trying to mimic English words. And he said, yeah, that was an extreme possibility that it could be. Mm-hmm. Really fast.
Yeah, I've heard that before. That the sound is somewhat Asian like. I've heard that before. Yeah,
it's really interesting. Another question here is: do you feel that the Sasquatch mystery will be solved in your lifetime?
Well, that's so hard to say, but I think we're closer. I think there's going to have to be more of a concrete physical evidence. And I hate to say that a body has to be brought in, but other than that, I don't know what it would be that would be convincing. I mean, we have all of the footprint information, some DNA information. We have, handprints, some videos, whether they be hoaxed or not, those are hard to say. We have the language recorded, a lot of sound recorded. All of these things do not, bring it to a concrete thing. So outside of a body, I don't know what it would be. I'm not pro hunting them, killing them just to bring in a body. So, I'm not pro that. But I think that, if there could be, a naturally deceased Bigfoot brought in, I think that would be a one way that it would be definitely more provable. Will it happen in my lifetime? I think it's real iffy if it's going to happen in my lifetime. I think it's something that a lot of people are out there, searching, trying to find something more concrete. Another possibility would be some of the people that talk about having, some kind of a more personal relationship with a clan of Bigfoot, maybe on their property or something. And if there could be enough interaction and trust built, possibly there could be a Bigfoot clan that might, at some point, someday in time, trust enough to be recognized. I don't know if that could happen or not, but I could see that being another possibility. I haven't heard of anyone else saying this, so I don't know that anyone else is thinking about developing that strong enough relationship whereby there could be some real legitimate interaction with a Bigfoot clan to almost like coming in contact with any, and I don't consider them wild animals, but I consider them definitely a private species out in the woods that don't necessarily want their world to be invaded by humans. So there would have to be some serious trust built in order for that to happen. But shy of that, I don't know, other than just a deceased body that brings forward. And in the past, there have been eras of time when I think deceased bodies or living bodies, there was more interaction. But our modern society today is one that, I don't know what we would specifically do if that was brought forward. I don't know. There would be laws changed, possibly protecting them. I don't know. There'd be industries I've heard that might be impacted, such as a logging industry or anything dealing with, the wooded areas. There might also be some kind of some strange laws might come into play. People don't always want to deal with that. But the other thing is they're so human-like, so human-looking and acting at times that some people, I think, are fearful that there might be some connection where they might be considered a species of human. And then you've got all of the rights that humans have that, we would have to deal with that legality. So I think as far as our government admitting it, they would rather just stay away from that with a 10-foot pole because it would be too complicated. But as far as, just the regular person being able to have some evidence, I think it's going to take a dead body, or it's going to take some kind of real public interaction that is with Bigfoot, and maybe even establishing an ability of communication with them that we can go beyond what we have now, which is just this elusive occasional interaction in a wooded area or otherwise with something that we can't prove. We just have the experience.
I know my own personal belief is I'm an animal guy, and I fluctuate back and forth between whether it's, like some type of primitive human or something like that. And, that brings up a lot of interesting questions. If it is some type of primitive human, then what would be the legalities of, would they be given human rights? What would you have to do? And I agree 100% with you that the government does not want to deal with it. I think that's more than they can handle. And then two, I've read several encounters where people have formed habituations with them, and, how they interact and things like that. And most of it revolves around food, which I'm not a fan of using food kind of as a lure to draw them in, because I think it would have a lot to do like with, the American black bear. If you constantly provide food for this animal, it's going to become dependent. It's going to become if you stop putting out the food sources and things like that, that they may become, irate that the food's not there anymore. And they may start moving in closer to humans to try to find more food. So that could create more problems. But it's an interesting scenario.
Yeah, I've had several people talk about doing the food gifting, and when it stops, they can get a little bit irate at times. So yeah. I don't think it's a good plan to do that on a regular basis, but sometimes people will do shiny things, and they seem to gift back and forth with, stones or sticks or something like that with shiny things. They seem to like having some kind of interaction with humans at times. It may be the juveniles. I'm not sure if it's the adults or the juveniles that like that interaction. They're probably a little bit more courageous. And the adults seem to keep their distance a little bit more.
It's interesting. Linda, what are your future plans for your podcast, books, shows, etc.?
Well, I am planning on continuing interviewing people about Bigfoot as long as I have people to interview, because those are they're very popular, and I really enjoy listening to what they have to say. At some point, I'd love to be able to get back into the Niagara River film and do a second series on that. I'd love to be able to find that and remote view that area where I think that Bigfoot clan exists. And hopefully we can get into that ravine and be able to have a little bit more interaction there if we can, near that goat farm. So all of those things are kind of in the works. I've got several other books out now and things that I'm doing, getting ready to start a new podcast that's not Bigfoot related. I'm going to keep my Bigfoot channel purely Bigfoot and keep that going, but try to keep my other stuff on another podcast. So I've got lots of things in the works.
Excellent. Now we're going to talk about a big one here. I want to talk about one of your books. And I know you've written several, but this one covers a pretty wide gambit of UFO encounters. I'm pretty sure Sasquatch encounters, everything. Talk to us a little bit about Thresholds to Encounters.
Yeah, Threshold to Encounters came about a year ago. I guess I brought that book out. It was just before I appeared at a conference talking about those Bigfoot encounters. As I was doing the research for that, it was interesting because I had already identified that the UFO research I'd done since the 90s correlated very heavily with the type of research I was doing with Bigfoot. And mostly that it's a mystery. Mostly that it's elusive, it's a mystery, and we don't know 100% what we're dealing with. It's something that is aliens are considered cryptids, just like Bigfoot's considered a cryptid. So I decided to take all of these past research expeditions that I've done and past research on UFOs and kind of put it into one category, Bigfoot, UFOs, and kind of ghost type activity, as to what the correlations between those and what might actually be happening as we have those thresholds to encounters. First of all, the big one is, can you trust your eyes? Can you trust what you're seeing, the experience you're having? You go into people go into almost like a weird shock mode, trying to figure out exactly what they're experiencing. And that kind of correlates all the way across the board, whether it be ghosts, Bigfoot, or UFOs. But the Bigfoot, I dwelled a lot on that because we've had a lot of Bigfoot encounters here in the Ozark area where I live, but also throughout Missouri, the state that I live in. And one goes back way back to the blue man, which was a big blue hairy character that when the sun shined on it, it looked almost blue. And that was something that made the newspapers down in southeast Missouri, and it was reported many times. And so that was a big, huge story in my neck of the woods. But my father grew up down in the kind of the Boot Hill area, or just close to the Boot Hill area of Missouri, right down in that same area where that blue man was seen. Now, I don't ever remember my dad talking about seeing Bigfoot, but I write extensively in there how he could have, because he grew up on like 2,000 acres down there in the middle of nowhere in the woods. And he and his dad, they built a log cabin shed on their property. They were just always out hunting. He was a woodsman. They were always sawing down, trees for their winter's wood supply. So he could have, in that neck of the woods, he could have seen a Bigfoot, but he never talked about it. He never talked about it. My second interview that I did was with someone who also grew up in that same neck of the woods. And he was a child and was out in a wooded area out in a field. And Bigfoot came across that field, and he hadn't seen it before, but still the same neck of the woods where a lot of Bigfoot activity was taking place from the 1800s right straight through to today. But at the same time, there was a lot of UFO activity in that area. Way back, there was a man called Buck Nelson who had this strange UFO craft would land on his property just outside of Mountain Grove, Missouri. And eventually there was some interaction between these cryptids, which are the alien beings, and himself. Now, I don't know that he ever saw a Bigfoot, but there again, we're talking the same neck of the woods that all of this activity was happening. So in the book, I bring out all of this history in Missouri and all this history of the correlation between these encounters. Then I talk, about a lot of the experiences that my people in my interviews also have had in the interviews that I did on research with UFO interviews as well. So it encompasses all of that. And then there's a little bit of science in there because I got to get science into everything that I do. But then there's also a thing in there that talks about other possibilities. There are so many things that we don't give any kind of consideration to when we have some kind of an unusual experience we can't explain. You mentioned MK Ultra earlier. MK Ultra was a program, where they could, kind of program people hypnotically. Well, I worked as a hypnotherapist for a lot of years. I was one of the main MUFON people who would take people who thought they had an alien encounter, regress them back to re-experience that through a hypnotic state. That doesn't mean it's a truth serum and that everything they say in a hypnotic state is absolutely true. But for sure, the human mind can be programmed to believe they've seen something or experienced something. And the MK Ultra really, really brought that out. But even programs like that, if one wanted to convince someone that they had a UFO encounter, it's possible under unusual circumstances, they could convince them they had and then make them forget that they had ever been convinced that they had. They would just think that was a real experience. I haven't heard much of Bigfoot experience that fits into that category. I don't know of people who've had an accident, end up in a hospital, and then can't explain, 3 or 4 days of their life there, like a lot of the MK Ultra people. But certainly, Bigfoot people and the experiences they have, there's so much sophisticated technological equipment today. Now, I go into that in the book too, where things can actually just be projected to our minds, and we can't tell the difference between what we're seeing and what we aren't seeing. So I'm not saying that any of these encounters are those things, but those are things we just need to give consideration to, especially because of the rise of so much technology in our world today, and just being aware of, what is real and what isn't real in this day and time. So it covers a lot of material.
That's very interesting. I kind of want to, if you don't care, I'd like to discuss kind of a theory that I have myself.
Sure.
One of my own personal theories is that when somebody encounters something, and I'm just going to stick with Sasquatch because, we are a Sasquatch show, but when they experience Sasquatch, that their mind tries so hard to explain what they've just saw that's not supposed to exist, that they really have no frame of reference for, that I think a lot of it is, misinterpreted. Like I said, with the cloaking or with the, it disappeared or whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's just human nature, is to try to explain something into rational terms. And we do that all the time. So I think a lot of people that might have seen a Bigfoot will just put in a classification of a bear. Someone that might have heard a Bigfoot sound they'll just put in a classification of, oh, that was a wolf or a coyote or a fox I heard out there. So it's really difficult to distinguish, exactly what we're seeing, exactly what we're hearing. But we tend to, just human nature, we tend to put in a category we already know first. And so there are lots of ways. Now, another thing, if you're a sensationalistic person and you're out there looking for Bigfoot, you may take a bear sighting and put it into a Bigfoot sighting, in your mind, because you want it to be a Bigfoot sighting. So sometimes it's hard to trust our perceptions, and it's really hard to be objective about those at times. So I think we have to be just super cautious about some of that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I completely agree. Linda, at this time, we're getting close to the end of the show here, and I would just like to give you the opportunity to plug all of your endeavors, your books, your YouTube channels, your podcasts, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can find me on YouTube. It's just Linda Eastburn YouTube channel. It's really easy to find. And there are over 450 Bigfoot interviews, lots of different varied opinions, and lots of interesting things. I appreciate anyone who goes, likes, shares, and subscribes. Subscribe helps us, as I know it does you. So you can always see me there. I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook group called Bigfoot Cryptid Midwest. Please come join us. And we're always discussing things on that Bigfoot group. Also, any of the books, Bigfoot, the Threshold to Encounters, you can find that on Amazon. Threshold to Encounters by Linda Eastburn. Just go up there. You can buy the book. I think we have it both on Kindle if you don't want a hard copy, but if you want to get a paperback copy, it's also sold on there. So appreciate everything that everyone does. But if you have a question for me personally, I'm always available. You can just email me, lindaeastburn@gmail.com. You can find me on there. There again, Facebook also. Just get in touch with me on there. So I'm easy to find.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I greatly appreciate you coming on the show. It's been a very interesting show. If you don't care, could you hang around just a little bit after I end the recording, and I'll get back with you. So,
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate everybody that tuned in tonight. This will be aired on August the 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And as always, thank you guys for watching Sasquatch Watch. Y'all have a good evening. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to Sasquatch Watch Radio. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Stay connected. Don't miss our next exciting show, airing next Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. To stay updated, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd also love for you to join our Facebook page at facebook.com/Sasquatch Watch Radio and check out our website at squatchradio.com. Share your stories and feedback. Your feedback means the world to us, so please give us a thumbs up on our shows and let us know what you think. Have you had an encounter? If you've had a sighting or encounter, we want to hear from you. Reach out to us through our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. And if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next Monday night.